Classic Las Vegas was one of those eras when Las Vegas really defined itself. It defined itself as different from anything else in the United States. Las Vegas was a little town in the middle of the desert. It had really functioned because of federal funding. With the end of World War II, that was all gone, so it had to become something else. And what it chose to do was to advertise itself as a place to have fun. World War II and the Depression before that had really stopped a lot of people in the United States from being able to do anything. You know, they were just getting by. They were trying to survive. With the end of World War II, you had people coming back from the war. They were going back to school. They were getting out of the military, out of this regimented lifestyle. They now could buy cars. They could now travel. They could get whatever they needed. And they wanted to let off steam. They wanted to be able to do something fun. Well, Las Vegas was here, play by day, play by night, seeing great entertainment throughout the Strip. Whichever property you were in, you had live entertainment in the lounges, you had the shows that you would go to, you had good food, you also had gaming. You know, we allowed you to spend your money here, and that was a good thing, because that's what underwrote it. So all the properties, all the casinos on the Strip, what they were trying to do was attract the eye so that you would drive into their parking lots. The casinos in the 1940s and 1950s in the main were 2 or 3 stories tall. They looked like fancy fronts on a motel. You know, so it wasn't what we think of today with these, you know, 30, 40, 50-story buildings and all of that sort of thing. This was all on a human level, on a ground level. And so you had to have signs and you had to have imagery that would draw you in. So you had porte cocheres with a lot of lights. You had huge signs. You had the champagne tower, or, you know, Aladdin standing on top of one of the buildings, or, you know, the silver slipper with a giant silver slipper up in the air. And all of the signs were meant to draw the eye. That was the underlying reason for the sign. It was not just put the name out there, because you could just put the name out there. You could have had a wooden board and just paint the name on it. That wasn't it. You wanted these signs. You wanted this kind of brightness, this kind of movement in the sign and all of that. So the signs took on a hugely important role in the advertising of the properties and the drawing of people into the properties.
Boneyard is made up of about 200 neon signs. We started this collection about 20 years ago and finally opened into a full-blown museum with a visitors center about 3.5 years ago. The popularity of the museum has been absolutely overwhelming. We've had visitors from 60 countries, every state in the United States, and so there's a real appetite for this type of museum. And it sort of tells the story of not only neon, but certainly of Las Vegas. Neon began to evolve in the 1920s and then the 30s, and then it really took off in the 1940s. And what you could do with neon and neon gas is you could, first of all, bend the tubes into spectacular images. Then you could light those tubes with all different kinds of colors of gas. And then when you combine the neon with the light bulbs and the canisters of the signs, you basically came up with not only a sign, but you came up with a work of art. So when Las Vegas started imploding all of its old hotels to start building the new hotels, we looked at this and said, hey, this is art. It's art and history. We need to keep it for generations to come. Because of the cost of the signs and the cost of restoration, we will not be able to restore all of the signs, and we wouldn't want to, because we love this boneyard, we love this museum, and it has its own vibe. There is a plan to restore multiple signs that will be along Las Vegas Boulevard, leading from the museum all the way to Sahara Avenue. But they're very expensive to restore. They are very expensive to move. The largest sign in the collection is the Stardust sign, and it cost $250,000 to move it to the boneyard. We just restored the Desert Rose Motel sign. Desert Rose Motel stood where Mandalay Bay is now located. That's a very small sign in our collection. It was not a full restoration effort. It was really the first one that was a conservation effort here in the Boneyard. And while the neon tubing was not completely restored, we did conserve other portions of it, including the lattice work, the red roses, the paint. That just by itself was $60,000. So I think you can see just how immense the job is when you talk about a complete restoration of any sign in this Boneyard. We actually do have several signs that are lit up here in the Boneyard. I believe we have 7. And it's interesting because a lot of people like to come at night and see the ones that are lit. It has a whole different feel to it than daytime such as now. Others like to come on a daytime tour because you can really see, I think, more of the design, the artwork, what really went into making these signs. So you sort of have 2 choices there, which kind of makes it fun. You know, when the Strip started in the 1940s, there were 7,000 people living in the Las Vegas Valley. There's now 2.1 million people living here. Las Vegas has not been really good about respecting its history. I think, as I've mentioned before, we've torn down a lot of iconic hotels. So as we've torn down these mid-century beauties, and they were beautiful hotels, I think it's important that we save at least some remnant from those hotels. So we think it's important that we need to protect our history. How did this city come about? In a city of a lot of magical places, this is probably the most magical.